I'm not a fan of a lot of people. I consider myself a critic. I will provide commentary, and I try to be somewhat cynical of people in the news and in public policy. There are not a lot of people of whom I would say I am a fan, that I deeply, deeply respect their work and admire them as people. Charles Krauthammer is one of the very few. Nationally syndicated Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist. He's been a doctor in his career. He's pretty much done most everything I would want to do in my life. He's an amazing story. He's going to be here on Monday to honor Houston philanthropist Artie Lee Hines at the Sheltering Arms Thought Leaders Luncheon. You can get tickets at shelteringarms.org. Shelteringarms.org. He's our guest, Dr. Charles Krauthammer. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. Thanks for that kind introduction.
Well, it happens to be true. My loyal listeners would tell you that I don't say that very often. I want to talk to you first, sir, about what's going on in the world. Foreign policy has leapt to the front of the agenda. I let our listeners script the questions. You noted the irony earlier this week of many on the left who have unintentionally become converts to George W. Bush's freedom agenda. And you're the guy who coined the Reagan doctrine and made it a popular source of conversation. Even Obama back in 2009 really didn't want to meddle, as he said, in the Iranian or Irani uprising. He's no freedom. He's no his thoughts on freedom in the Arab world unclear. It seems that the mantle of George W. Bush, that mantle of freedom, has been dragged back out. If you could, your assessment of what's going on in Libya, and then a more sweeping the Middle East, Tunisia, Bahrain, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and the like.
Well, in Libya, we're right now at the moment of truth. Gaddafi's comeback is just about complete. He's got only one more target left. He's just taken the last town on the road to Benghazi. Benghazi in the east, 1 million people. That's headquarters of the rebels. He takes Benghazi, it's over. And his way of taking a city is to flatten it from the outside, indiscriminate attacks. His son last night used a very ominous word. He said the cleansing of Benghazi is imminent. And that tells us we're looking at something that might be near genocide. They're just going to hit the city with everything they have. And I think at this point, the administration, which has been dithering, is going to act, or at least my impression is that it wants to, although it may be too late. It really is a matter of hours here. And had they done something early on when Gaddafi was on his heels, when the rebels were at the gates of Tripoli or on their way, it wouldn't have taken very much at all to knock him off. A few bombs on the compound, and one of his own Praetorian guards would have just shot him. That's how it usually ends with these dictators. And we'd have a new day in Libya. A difficult day, but a new day. Well, now that's going to be far more difficult. I think the administration is going to move to act because it simply doesn't want to be responsible for the massacre that's about to come. And what that will take will be more than a no-fly zone. At this point, a no-fly zone is much too passive. The rebels are in disarray. We're going to have to, or we and whoever it's going to be, the British, the French, NATO, air power, is going to have to take out tanks, artillery, and any naval vessel that Gaddafi is using to shell the city. So it's going to have to be a no-move zone. And that will require far more aggression, far more attacking, far more risk by us, but that's what happens when you wait too long. And Obama's a man who's extremely indecisive. He has no foreign policy, vision, theme, idea, other than some kind of vague guilt over what America might have done that was not quite right over the last 100 years, and for which he's apologized everywhere he's gone, which is why he didn't do anything in Iran during the revolution, abortive revolution in 2009. That was truly a national scandal and a disgrace, because he said he didn't want the U.S. to be seen as meddling. And 58 years ago, during the 1953 coup, we'd been involved and therefore we don't want to get involved. I mean, that is scandalous. And now Obama's going to have to make a decision on Libya.
Dr. Charles Krauthammer, is it your sense that these rebellions, Egypt, Bahrain, Libya, are Hamas or Al-Qaeda backed? I mean, I don't get the sense they're true populist uprisings. Your thoughts?
I think it really varies from country to country. It started in Tunisia, which has a very, very weak, non-existent Islamist movement. So that's not. Egypt, it was definitely started by secular young people, not at all Islamist. There was very little green flags or Islamic slogans shouted in the Egyptian revolution. Now, that doesn't mean a revolution can start out being led by one group and taken over by the bad guys. I mean, we've got a lot of history on that. French Revolution, Russian Revolution, Iranian Revolution of 1979. The problem with Egypt is the Muslim Brotherhood that's lying in the background, the most organized, most disciplined, most politically powerful political entity in the country. Now, that it's still not a majority, but if the Democrats and the secularists and the young people are fractured, they're not united, it doesn't take a majority to rule. 30-40% will get you there. So the danger of Egypt is not that it was led by Islamists, but that there are enough of them there that they could, if this thing is mishandled and goes wrong, take over. And it differs everywhere. Libya, we don't know who the hell the rebels are. They're so disorganized. It's a very tribal society. But we know that Gaddafi is a butcher, a Caligula, somebody in the class of Saddam Hussein in his cruelty, although he didn't have quite the technology and effectiveness and the ruthlessness of a man in Saddam who actually used poison gas on his own people. So that's a different order of magnitude. And then you've got the Gulf, which is very complicated, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. The problem with Bahrain and Saudi Arabia is this. Iran claims Bahrain as its own territory, the same way that Iraq under Saddam claimed Kuwait. So if you get a popular revolution of Shiites, and that's the majority in Bahrain, succeeding, they could very easily turn to Iran and say, annex Bahrain, make us part of your dictatorship, which is what it is. And then you've got a catastrophic problem of Iran literally on the doorstep of Saudi Arabia, because Bahrain is a tiny island connected by a causeway to the eastern provinces of Saudi Arabia. So there it gets very complicated, and there it's very difficult to know what to do. But it was not that difficult to know what to do in Egypt. And right now, I think the choices for Obama in Libya are pretty stark and clear.
With this administration, we noted the irony of Obama receiving a transparency award yesterday at an event that was closed to the media. You're as close to the Washington press corps and have a better sense than probably anyone as to the thoughts. Is this media finally? Are they finally? Is the bloom off this rose yet, or are they still as in love? Are they still having thrills up their legs?
I think the thrills up their legs have been cured. I think those who still have them are incurable. But I think for most of the press here, they did certainly swoon. They lost their heads. They had no judgment at all, and they went with the charisma in 2008, and they sort of woke up with a headache. You know, they look across the pillow, and who they wake up with, they're not quite sure how they got into this. So, for most of the media, here's what happened: they went from a swoon to back to their usual normal liberalism.
Right.
In other words, it's not that they've been cured of liberalism; they've been cured of Obamaism. So they're basically in relation to this president the way they were to any Democratic president. Of course, inherently favorable because they don't have much use for Republicans or conservatives, but not completely blinded the way they were in 2008 by the dazzling Obama. So that, I think, is the difference. So you do get, some critical questions, some questioning his leadership. They'll all be behind him in 2012 because, of course, that's when they got to circle the wagons and keep the barbarians, meaning the conservatives, the pitchfork crowd, out of power. But that's just the norm. That's just like the sun rising in the east.
My last question, Dr. Charles Krauthammer. Last weekend, you made waves on a PBS program, no less, Inside Washington, discussing NPR. You slammed them for, quote, living on the teat of the state. Now, a few minutes ago, the House voted to defund NPR. What does that look like in the coming years without the $5 million taxpayer subsidy?
Well, actually, I was less polite than you were.
I know.
I like the way you said teat, which is the polite way to say it. I use the alternate pronunciation, most likely more pungent. By the way,
but you're so much more sophisticated than I am. I wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt on that.
Exactly. No, I appreciate that. For my mother, I'm sure she'll appreciate the euphemism. By the way, it's not a PBS show. It's produced by ABC News, an ABC News affiliate in D.C. PBS stations have carried it for 20 years.
Okay.
But just so you know, it's a private enterprise. Anyway, my view is that I have nothing against liberal media. I read the New York Times. Doesn't bother me, but they should do it on their own dime. Rush Limbaugh makes it on his own. So does Fox News. If NPR can't make it on its own, it doesn't deserve to be in the marketplace. There's no reason for government to be in the news business. You might have made that case 50 years ago when there were only 3 networks, and you might have said, okay, we need one other outlet to give a different point of view, fine. But we don't live in that world. That was pre-internet, pre-cable, pre-satellite, pre-everything. So I don't have a visceral hatred of public television or radio. I watch some of their programs, but I just don't see how anybody can possibly make the case for a government subsidy. So it seems to me that's sort of where we want to be. I'm not particularly hostile to them, but let them make it on their own the way everybody else does.
I promised your people I wouldn't keep you more than one segment, but if I could ask you one other question that just came to mind.
Sure, absolutely.
If you look at a candidate for 2012, and I've cautioned listeners to hold off until they begin to emerge and we see how they can react under stress, who do you see out there that has the ability both to win and that should win because they're right on the issues?
Yeah. Well, that's a tough one. It's tough because so much will depend on contingencies, things like unemployment rate and gas prices. But assuming the president is vulnerable, which I think he is right now, the Republican field right now, the way it's shaping up, is weak. And I say that without disrespect to any of the candidates. I know some of them, I like them, I respect them. But they simply have, most of them right now, the front runners have political baggage, history that's going to weigh them down. Obamacare for Romney, because he had Romney Care.
Sure.
Massachusetts, these are all well known. Newt's got a past. He's got a lot of tread marks on his chest, tire marks. They just been around. They have problems. And that's why I think this is a year in which something unusual might happen. The view I have is that the Republicans have a very strong bench. They got a very strong set of young and up-and-comers who would be natural candidates for 2016. Chris Christie, Marco Rubio, Paul Ryan, Nikki Haley. You've got all these young governors, young guns out there. And there might come a point where Republicans say to each other, mid-year, maybe even approaching the fall as it gets pretty late, and they say, maybe we just got to take a risk. Move one of these guys or girls up, not wait for 2016. It's a little bit presumptuous, say, for a first term governor of New Jersey to run for the presidency. At a decency, you ought to wait a little longer. But maybe there's no waiting this time around. Maybe we got to reach into the future and go for a young gun now. And I think that unless one of the established candidates sort of takes off, and I don't really see that happening, there might be a movement for a Ryan, the congressman of Wisconsin, who's
Sure.
a budget guy, Walk of the Year, or a Chris Christie, maybe somebody like Mitch Daniels. He's not one of the young guns, but he's less known. So you may get something like that happening, and I think it's going to get very unpredictable and very wild. The one thing I think you might expect is that somebody gets pulled out of the future and said, go for it now.
Let's hope so, because I'm not comfortable with the field as we have them. Dr. Charles Krauthammer, thanks for being our guest.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks for all you do, sir. Nationally syndicated Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist. He will be here on Monday to honor Houston philanthropist Artie Lee Hines at the Sheltering Arms Thought Leaders Luncheon. You can get your tickets at shelteringarms.org and then / Charles Krauthammer. I think if you just go to shelteringarms.org, you'll be able to find it. And we'll put a link to all of that on our website at michaelberry.com.